Welcome to the ninth episode of Foreign Correspondents Deeper into Hitchcock podcast. My name is Michał Oleszczyk and I'm joined as always by my co-host
Sebastian Smoliński. Hello.
In this podcast, we discuss all of Alfred Hitchcock's filmography. We go one title per episode, and last time we discussed The Manxman, the film that was released in January of 1929. And we encourage you to listen previous episodes of our podcast. We did all the silent filmography of Hitchcock, that is all of the surviving films. But now we are coming to a real transition point, both for Hitchcock and I think for our podcast, because things start to be really exciting. I think there will be many very exciting films coming up, but also we will discuss a film called Blackmail that was a pivotal point in Hitchcock's career, and also it belongs to a pivotal point in world cinema history, because it is the first British talkie, the first British sound picture. It's also one of the very crucial early sound features globally in terms how it uses sound. So we'll discuss that. We'll discuss the uses of sound, of new ways of staging for Hitchcock's career. But the first thing that has to be said about Blackmail is that it is a film that exists in two versions. Actually, it does exist as a silent film and it does exist as a sound film, and you can watch both of those versions on DVD and elsewhere. So let's say by starting that we saw both versions, and we'll also compare them in this podcast. We'll also discuss the history of the making of the film, because it's actually very interesting. The primary reading for this episode, and we do recommend this book, is a small book by Tom Ryall called Blackmail. It was published in the BFI Film Classics series. So, Sebastian, can you tell us a little bit about the history of the making of Blackmail?
Yes, of course, with pleasure. Basing on Tom Ryall's, let's say, research, we should say that, as you mentioned, it's considered the first British talkie, and probably the transition to sound we know mostly, let's say, from this Hollywood perspective, that it went really fast. 1927, The Jazz Singer. 1929, we have first musicals, and actually in US in 1929, 1930, silent cinema is dead. Of course, it wasn't like that in many other countries. When I think about, for example, Japanese cinema, Yasujiro Ozu was making silent movies up to 1934, 35. So it took much more, and also the Great Britain was also not ready for such a fast transition. So the story of Blackmail is very complicated, I would say, and there are, of course, as usually with Hitchcock and with cinema history in general, there are some competing narratives. Probably they are competing because, directors, artists, they want to have their narrative put in books, and maybe producers have some other narrative, and historians dig deeper and realize that it was different. So as far as I understood it, Blackmail was the case of Hitchcock kind of feeling that, as you mentioned in the previous episode, that the sound is there, it's coming really fast, and maybe I should shoot it in such a way that would allow me to change it into the sound version really fast, just by reshooting some scenes. And we should say that the sound version was the one that premiered first. It was the first version that was released. So, if you will, we can call it the default version, although I don't think that such labels are useful here, because several months later, the silent version was released. And you may ask why, right? Why release silent version as a second release? It's because there were only several dozens of theaters that were equipped with sound in Great Britain. So Blackmail had its premiere, kind of, we could say, prestigious premiere in well equipped theaters, but there were many theaters in UK that just couldn't show this movie. So the silent version was released to satisfy the smaller theater chains. So that's the, let's say, this technological perspective. But what is really interesting is that by looking and by comparing two versions, which and Charles Barr does it very meticulously, Tom Ryall is not that interested in this regard. He offers more of a, could say, critical history, which is why I would recommend this book in the first place. He's summing up the entire discussion about blackmail since the year of the premiere, since 1929, up to feminist critics like Tania Modleski, up to Robin Wood's remark on blackmail, and up to Charles Barr, comparing two versions, and we see that it's a, as Charles Barr names it, it's a bricolage. It's not a simple example of just adding some sound scenes to the pre-existing silent material, but it's really mixed. The silent version has some shots that were shot later. The sound version has a lot of silent material which is mixed with the sound material. And just not to bore you with details, I just want to add that you can see that in the character of the police inspector, who's played by two actors in both versions. So it's funny because in one scene you have one actor, in the other you have the second actor, and then in the third scene you have once again the same actor. So it's not consistent in this regard. So Blackmail is a fascinating example of this competing technological systems, a time of we could say chaos, and many people say that not only filmmakers but also producers and theater owners, they didn't know what to do exactly. It's often at such moments in history of the movies that we don't know what to do. What should we do with this novelty? In Great Britain, which is of course funny when you consider this nation as a, let's say, nation of the greatest conservatives on earth, sound was considered, as I mentioned, a novelty that will soon be just a trick, that it will not be it will not surpass silent cinema, and the silent movies will not end. And one of the critics said that probably there will be double bills, one with sound film and one with silent movie, because the audience won't stand two sound films in a row. It will be too much, too many sounds and images together. Just too much. Kicks, too many kicks, we could say. So this is pretty interesting, and we could of course continue that discussing Blackmail itself, scene by scene.
Mm-hmm. That's a fascinating background, and yes, by the very existence of those two versions, it's almost like an invitation to compare them and to see the differences. There are very pointed differences in dialogue, for example, just in terms of what the characters are saying to one another in the sound version and in the silent version. So there are clear differences, but absolutely, I think what is crucial and apparent at first glance is the incredible ability of Hitchcock to think about this film and to execute it in two different ways at once, because the silent Blackmail works as a silent film. It does use the vocabulary and the syntax of a silent film, and it was shot that way. And the sound Blackmail does invent some new syntax and vocabulary for the use of sound. So there are really two films. They work on their own terms, and of course Blackmail is an early sound picture, so it's not like Hitchcock would employ all the tricks that was even technically impossible. And some of the sound tricks that he employs are rather simple, I would say, like the sound of the canary singing in the cage throughout the scene of the character played by Annie Ondra, Alice. putting on clothes in her bedroom, that's quite a simple solution to have the bird singing all the time. But still, this is incredible how this testifies to Hitchcock's brilliance and his great intelligence on the set, because he knew as he was shooting it that he's basically shooting like two versions of the same film. So he was adopting the camera movements, the cutting, the staging, the acting. There are many casting differences between those two versions. For example, the character of the nosy neighbor is also played by two different women. So it's incredible, for a filmmaker to have that good of a command of his craft, to be actually making those two films and making them differently. It wasn't like, Hitchcock said, okay, so let's not bother with the silent one, let's do it just, so that it exists. No, it's actually, it works on its own terms, and it's good. So I would start by saying that. Also, let's remember that by this time, a viewer of the time could almost have forgotten that Hitchcock was a director of thrillers, because not since The Lodger in 1926 did he make a thriller. There were 6 melodramas in between. We actually discussed all of them on this podcast. So here is Hitchcock also coming back to the terrain, let's say, of The Lodger and of thriller, of mystery, crime drama, which is also very, very crucial. And this film begins with a sequence that is pure procedural, like a crime procedural. We actually see, and this is largely a silent sequence, we also should mention, this is a part talkie, so it's not like all of the sequences have a synchronized sound, but this whole sequence of a capture of a criminal by police, which doesn't have any connection to the later plot. We don't see that criminal again. The only connection to the plot is the character of the policeman, Frank, who is the boyfriend of the main character, Alice. So that's the only connection. This whole very elaborate long sequence of capturing of the criminal, and also we will see that that idea of the policeman boyfriend and of the dynamics, the possible threat to a relationship, were also explored in The Lodger. But let's just say very briefly what Blackmail is about. It's as the title, Blackmail, actually concerns a young woman, Alice White, who is the daughter of shop owners in London. So here's definitely a personal tie to Hitchcock. The film is based on a play by Charles Bennett, and Alice White is a girlfriend of a policeman, and at one point she has a quarrel with her fiancé, and she decides to accept an invitation from an artist played by Cyril Richard, who invites her to his studio, and there he attempts to rape her. She kills him with a knife. She escapes the place of the killing. She roams the city for a while. Then she goes back to her parents' place, and she's tormented by the shock of the violence that she both experienced and also of the killing that she did. So she spends the rest of the film almost in this sort of a stupor. And immediately afterwards, the boyfriend actually examines, in his professional capacity as a policeman, he examines the crime scene. He discovers a glove that belongs to Alice. He knows immediately that she did it. He wants to protect her. And there is the character of the blackmailer, who actually saw Alice leaving the place on the night of the crime, and he starts to blackmail Alice and her boyfriend, saying that he will tell it all. He ends up killed in a police chase at the very end of the film, which takes place in British Museum. And at the end, and this is the wonderfully Hitchcockian twist, the actual culprit who did the murder, Alice, remains scot-free. She's cleared. I mean, she is not even suspected. She's tormented by guilt, of course, but she is free at the end of this picture. And we'll discuss the end because it has its own implications. But basically, this is a film focused again on a female character, just like The Manxman, on a female character played by Annie Ondra, who is first seen as the sort of moody, almost petulant girlfriend to Frank. Then she is the victim of sex violence. Then she becomes a killer, and then for a long stretch she is tormented by guilt, by fear, by the shock of the trauma that she experienced. And really, I would say to this day, it's a powerful portrayal of many traumas that she experienced, the character of Annie Andra.
Oh, definitely. And when we discussed Marksman, you mentioned that this guilt is all over the picture. And what I forgot to add is that we are implicated in this guilt in a very beautiful way. And of course, this is something we associate with the art with Hitchcock's art. And Blackmail is the purest example so far of our implication in violence and in guilt and in rape. In a way, we are there, we are witnessing that, and we are with the heroine. So that's one of the reasons why, as we will certainly mention later discussing murder, that Hitchcock was not that fond of whodunits. So the structure, this plot type that we are looking for the killer. We do not know who killed whom. I mean, we know who is dead, but we don't know who is the killer. So in Blackmail, we know immediately what's going on. But what I find so strong, and probably even in this, magical way, or I could say dreamlike way, is stronger in the silent movie. So this implication that we are with the woman who killed someone. I don't want to say that we are with the murder, because I think that Robin Wood's very interesting remarks, written from we could say feminist perspective, from an anti-patriarchal perspective, suggests that if so-called murder scene in Blackmail should not be called murder scene, because she's not really, the killer. She's just defending herself, and the fact that we say it's a murder scene kind of testifies to the sexism of our culture. It's we can agree or not agree with that, but certainly it's there is something in this point, something very interesting, and I would say that the way this movie implicates us, and of course many future Hitchcock movies, is really fascinating, and Annie Andra's performance is crucial once again, as in The Marksman. And you mentioned the stupor she experiences after the killing. And so maybe just a bit of trivia, as we discussed earlier, she was not British or American, so her English was not perfect. It was probably similar to my English, so with a strong accent, and she had to be dubbed, and she was actually dubbed by Joan Barry, but it wasn't done in post-production as we do it nowadays, but Joan Barry was just behind the camera speaking her lines, and many critics say that it influenced Annie Andra's performance, that her hesitations, her kind of dreamlike performance, the way she delivers her lines, maybe a bit slower, and maybe she's not sure what she's saying. It's probably because of, or maybe also because of the way it was shot. So this dubbing influenced the, I think, overall atmosphere of the movie. Of course, I'm talking now about the sound version.
Yeah, that's interesting. The way it was dubbed, technically, it was impossible to do it any other way. It may make you think of the famous scene in Singing in the Rain, where Debbie Reynolds is doing the actual singing behind the curtain, and Gene Hagen is only mouthing to the song on the stage. It looked a little bit like that on the set. I think that it probably it's very interesting that it contributed to the general confusion of the character, but also she's very good on her own terms as an actress. She really is. I mean, it's a very good performance. Actually, you can see on YouTube there is a sound test for Blackmail that it's miraculously surviving. And the Hitchcock is talking to Annie Andra, and she's speaking in her own voice. He's doing a sound test for her. He's telling her a dirty joke, and she's laughing. So we can tell what her English was like. It wasn't that bad actually, but yes, it was strongly accented, so she couldn't possibly play Girl from London. But so this is interesting in its own terms. As far as the whole sexual violence theme is also very interesting, and probably it's open to interpretation so much because Hitchcock very strategically, but also for censorship reasons, keeps the curtain closed on the actual violence. So literally, there is, this artist in his bedroom, he has a black curtain hanging from the ceiling, which covers his bed, almost like he was a king. It's not really probable, but it does allow the key moment of the scene to be played behind curtains, so we don't see like the actual violence, and we also we don't see the actual killing, so we don't know how it all went down. But what's definitely true is that the moment itself and the whole brutally perverse sequence of the sexual teasing and then of sexual violence is definitely quite disturbing. I mean, it's of course we will many episodes in the future will discuss the most disturbing scene of all in Hitchcock, the rape scene in Frenzy. But here you can already tell that Hitchcock takes some sort of a pleasure from postponing, from stretching the scene as long as he can. The whole interaction between Cyril Richard and Annie Ondra here has this predatory undertones. She's being slowly undressed, then she actually puts on a tutu, a ballet dress, and there's the scene with the partition where she's undressing on one half of the screen, he is playing music on the other half of the screen. There's this whole perverse game going on, I would say mostly between Hitchcock and us, because he knows, and that we know, that the sexual violence is coming. We do sense it, and he postpones it as much and as long as possible. And the whole idea of them spending the time together in the studio, making a drawing, they're putting a actual painting of a laughing jester, of a clown laughing at the characters. I think the jester is Hitchcock. I mean, he's laughing at us, he's laughing at the characters, he knows very well what he's up to. So I would say that this is one of the most disturbing pieces of silent cinema, this whole sequences at the attic in the studio. And of course, what comes later, this sort of post-traumatic, post-rape attempt, post-murder scene is incredibly moving, because you can see her, she's roaming around the city, she sort of has this blank stare of a victim and of traumatized person. Many years later, Jack Garfine will make a film called Something Wild with Carol Baker, which also opens actually with a rape attempt, and then has this very long sequence, 25 minutes I think, of pure silence and of the girl just trying to cope with her feelings and with her situation. So here you have also something like that. It takes you deeply into that character, and then it switches into, of course, the thriller mode, where the key point is the boyfriend actually learning that it is his girlfriend who was the killer. So there's this whole issue of of blackmail and stuff. But I would say that we can discuss the famous knife scene because it's very exemplary in terms of how Hitchcock uses sound. I think it's quoted in every single history of cinema, how wonderful the use of sound in this sequence is. So maybe a little bit about the knife scene.
Yes, this is really the most famous scene, and of course, I encourage our listeners and all of us to always look anew at such scenes, because that's the problem with such famous scenes which are quoted everywhere, that they become part of our film studies vocabulary, but they do not astonish us anymore. And I don't think that Blackmail, which is a 90-year-old movie, it turned 90 last year in 2019, should astonish us in a way maybe contemporary narratives do, but still it's a striking scene. And also Tom Royal describes the way that the scene was analyzed throughout the years. And it says, once again, a bit of trivia. I found it very interesting that, for example, Anthony Asquith, who was Hitchcock's contemporary, also a very good director, he for example, he in Penguin Film Review, so in a book published sometime in the 30s, I think, or 40s, said that this scene is just brilliant, and it's one of the best uses of sound ever in cinema. So yes, so this scene, which maybe nowadays when the subjective sound is used very widely by many directors, it's not that striking. But certainly this idea that sound does not have to be fully synchronized with what's going on with the, let's say, objective reality of the frame of the scene, was something really really new. And as Tom Ryall once again suggests, it probably put Hitchcock closer to Soviet filmmakers who wanted to put such theories in practice, but Hitchcock was there first, so we could say it was his avant-garde idea. Maybe I will just describe the scene briefly. You beautifully described the heroine, wandering in the city, which once again it's very. I think it's very clever idea to let her just wander here and there, because we know from the previous scenes that she lives very close to this rapist, to the man she killed, because she says that I live just around the corner. And then we have this we have the sequence that she's walking in London for like 8 hours, and then we have this breakfast scene, and this nosy neighbor, as you called her, is talking. She's standing at the door, and she's talking about this murder, and she suggests, which is of course once again a part of Hitchcock's dark humor, that black humor, that using a knife is a very un-British way of killing a man. And this word knife is repeated several times, and it makes her explode psychologically. She throws. She is about to cut a loaf of bread, but she throws the knife, as in this uncontrolled burst of emotion. She's not hurting anyone, but it's a striking scene because there is a cut to the wider angle, wider frame, and we see the whole family. So we're kind of when she's throwing this knife, we once again are kind of outside of her subjective perspective that Hitchcock put us earlier in the scene. I hope my description is pretty kind of understandable. But yes, this is a striking scene, and it's still it's something interesting, and the way Hitchcock uses sound also in other scenes. I like these conversations between men, between policemen in Scotland Yard, because there was this we could say very schematic approach in the early sound period, that we need to see the speaker, and the camera always needs to be focused on who's speaking, because otherwise audience wouldn't get it. And Hitchcock knew even then that it's not true, that you can have this dialogue in the background as one of the noises, as one of the sounds, and the camera can be somewhere else. Now I'm referring to the scene when Frank is going to the attic to see to examine the crime scene.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's there are so many aspects of this film that we'll definitely not be able to mention them all in this episode. But one that I would definitely like to mention is that also you can trace how Hitchcock's self-consciousness, but also self-reflexivity develops in this film. It's starting to become very clear that he is also an ironic filmmaker, that there are levels of irony in this film. First of all, his cameo here as the guy on the subway who is being teased by a naughty boy, and it's actually like a little performance. This cameo is not just he's sitting there; he's actually making his appearance into a comic vignette. So he knew by now that people would look for his appearance, and that it will begin. It will be noticed. Let's say it's not something unnoticeable. Second level of irony is the props and the elements of the world in this film that actually seem to be commenting on the action. I mentioned the jester on the painting. But also, I would say that the singing bird in the scene of her putting on clothes, also the knife scene with the sound being amplified, it's also in a way ironic, that she's holding the knife and the neighbor is commenting on knives all the time. So it's a very bitter irony. It's biting, but it's there. But I would say that also in the dialogue, in the sound version, when the policeman is speaking to his girlfriend, to Alice, and they are discussing, oh, should we go and see a movie tonight? Like these are characters in a film that are seeing other films, which also is a pretty self-conscious move. And there's in the sound version, there's the interesting dialogue. It's not in the silent version. The policeman says something. Oh, let's see, this film Fingerprints is about Scotland Yard, and definitely the filmmakers got something wrong about Scotland Yard, because I work at Scotland Yard, so I know what's right. And she says that there's this punchline that I think it's fine because they hired a real criminal to be a director. Like the director is said to be a real criminal. So it's an obvious joke on Hitchcock's part. It has nothing to do with the plot, but it does show his self-reflexivity, and also the way that he's flaunting his camera movements. The painter and Alice are walking up a flight of stairs, and camera is moving upwards on this very elaborate set of a staircase that is sort of flowing in front of our eyes. Also the neon sign that turns from a cocktail shaker into a dagger being stabbed repeatedly. There are those visual flourishes that culminate in a sequence that perhaps is the most important sequence in terms of how often it was repeated later on by Hitchcock, which is the chase scene at the British Museum. So we have a big culmination taking place in a spectacular location, like Statue of Liberty in Saboteur or Royal Albert Hall in two films that are coming up. But here we have British Museum. Actually, yes, the whole sequence was shot in a studio, and then there was a very elaborate process used to put in the backdrops of the museum, and you still cannot tell. I wouldn't guess that from watching the film. I had to read about it, but I didn't know it. So it looks wonderful, and the film is only an hour and 22 minutes long, but it's packed with ideas. It's packed with ingenuity. I'm so glad in a way that a filmmaker like Hitchcock got to experience such a pivotal moment in history of film when everything was changing, and he proved that he was not only able to use this new language, but he actually was able of inventing it, of putting it to such a flexible use. I would say that nowadays filmmakers are also faced with many technical revolutions, but not every day can you see a filmmaker who is actually so actively inventing new vocabulary, and he was. So I found that film very exciting in its both incarnations, and I liked it a lot.
Yes, this is really amazing, and this movie shows us that it's not true that every movie that was made in this early sound period had to have very static camera. This is one of these cliches that are repeated all the time. And in fact, close examination shows us, for example, the difference in this. Once again, let's refer to it as the murder scene. You mentioned this frame when the painter is at the piano. And by the way, he's singing a self-reflexive song, kind of commenting upon the heroine's behavior, because it's a song about this modern girl, we could say, and he says that, oh, it's about you. So it's one of this another ironic touch. And in this scene, in the sound version, we just have a frame which is divided in two by a curtain, and she's dressing on the right, he's playing on the left, and it's a static shot, yes, because in the silent version we have the camera approaching the girl who's almost naked, and the camera is approaching the girl, and we see the painter's head in the frame, and it's this ominous shot of him coming at her. So there are such differences, but overall they're not that striking. Also because this movie is such a patchwork. A patchwork work of art, so it's all mixed, and it's more dynamic than we could suppose. So yes, this is really exciting, and also I find it kind of once again ironic that Hitchcock is often quoted as saying that silent cinema was this pure cinema, that was the real cinema. But let's be honest, his greatest movies, his masterpieces are of course are sound movies. He was not Murnau in the silent period, I would say. I would agree with some critics who say that we watch his silent movies because they are Hitchcock's movies. They're not necessarily, not all of them are interesting enough to stand on their own, right? Maybe that's a bit of a harsh opinion, but I think he certainly discovered himself anew in this sound technique. So I find it ironic and contradictory that Hitchcock claiming that silent cinema was the real art, was the art of moving images, whereas we see from the very beginning that how much his art, his irony, his techniques of suspense, benefit from sound.
I fully agree. I think it's very beautifully put, and I would only add to wrap it up slowly that I think that Hitchcock's great strength, apart from his visual design, which he had an incredible sense of, but was in creating various tensions and various counterpoints, and sound added an incredible new instrument, for him to create counterpoints, to layer things, to make the sound not necessarily the extension of the image, but actually counterpoint to it, or something that is surprising, something that seems even to be at times contradictory. But actually, at the end, it works beautifully. And here, I think it's one of the most exciting films in the history of cinema, in terms that you can really see that something is being hatched, something is being born, and you have this brilliant mind, the brilliant artistic mind of Hitchcock, really crafting and carving a new way for himself, I would say, mostly for cinema also, but mostly for himself, for his individual pursuit of excellence in this art. And yes, I love the film, and I think it should be absolutely watched by all film students, but simply by film goers. So I won't be very original, but so far I would say that this is my favorite Hitchcock film. The Lodger probably would come second, and soon we will see what next chapters will be for Hitchcock in sound films, because it's not as if from now on he struck this gold mine and started making masterpieces. There will be some films that even for him the medium of sound film will be problematic, but here happily it works.
So let me ask you a question about the ending. We mentioned that we will discuss the ending, and my larger question is, what do you think? Let's try to approach this movie from, I don't know, maybe we could call it feminist perspective. Let's discuss the way she's depicted and the way it all resolves, because I would agree with Robin Wood that if you just outline the plot, then you have this classic story, almost noirish story of this femme fatale, because of her flirtatious nature, we could say, or maybe not nature, but her attitude at that particular day. Because what I also like about this movie is that it's very concise. It's just something like 24 hours, right, from the evening to the day after. It takes place. So she's a flirt, definitely. She's depicted as one, and she's performed by Annie Ondra as one. and there are two corpses on the way. One is the would-be rapist, or just the rapist that she kills. The other one is Tracy, and some critics say that we don't really know if Tracy, this blackmailer, he was guilty of any serious crime, because it's not said. It's left out of the narrative, I would say. We don't know. We also do not know what's his relation with the artist, with whom he's speaking before they enter the apartment, before he and Alice White enter his attic. But he's also dead because of, let's say, we could say her flirtatiousness. But you mentioned the powerful atmosphere of the movie, the rape scene, which is striking nowadays. The stupor she's in, the sequence when she's wandering in the city, like once again, like in Annie Ondra in The Manxman, like in a trance. So I wonder, what do you think about this character, and what about the resolution? Because I think this is kind of an open ending. I would not say that it's an ambiguous ending. I mean, it is, but it's also an open ending. In a way, I want to know what will be next, what will be their relation, and if she will be, kind of exposed by him. What about his sense of duty? Because once again, as in The Manxman, we have this man's sense of duty. Like Philip had to decide if he wants to be a lawyer and kind of cover up the whole affair, or he wants to be honest with himself. So in this case, I think there are a lot of questions. But what do you think?
Well, I think the film is also deeply ironic in how it treats the matter of sex and gender, because the film ends with an act of derision towards any female agency whatsoever, because the policeman that they talk to, Frank and Alice, clearly derides and jokes about the idea of female detectives emerging. Like Frank says to, and previously she says that she knows who did it, and then she speaks the truth. She says, "I did it." She says it to Frank, and that other policeman is making a joke, saying something like, what do you know? Once females will be allowed into the profession, probably I will lose my job. Ha 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 ha. And they all start laughing. Like, it's just a ridiculous idea for a woman to be an investigator, but also by extension an agent. An agent of action, to be her own person. So, and it's not like Hitchcock is laughing with them. She's laughing in a very, very bitter way, because she knows actually that she's much more of an agent, because she actually killed the guy. So, and Hitchcock is not laughing with the policeman. He's saying, this is a society founded on deep contradictions. You have a powerful, strong character who is actually capable of defending herself to the point of murdering the rapist. So she is strong. She does have the strength. But within the culture, she is being seen purely in terms of passivity. She's just the policeman's girlfriend. She's just the daughter. She's all of these things that the culture imposes on her. And I think that this is the deep roots. This is the deep root of the tensions within the film, because the film actually, and apparently the play, which I haven't read, the Charles Bennett play, but many authors comment on that within the play there is this very, very strong criticism of the idea of valuing premarital chastity on part of a woman, of course, as something that is absolutely crucial for the marriage. She is being criticized by her parents for going out late. There is much stress put on her and much significance on her preserving her virginity and chastity before marriage. So the play is very much about this very impossible situation that this young woman finds herself in, which is, strong sexual craving, which is natural for a young woman of her age. On the other hand, this complete this rule of complete chastity that she is bound to as a young woman in this society, and then what you called her flirtatiousness, which is purely a natural way of showing her sexual energy in towards the artist, towards the artist who starts teasing with her and then becomes violent. So my long answer to your many questions is this: that this is a film about a powerful female agent who is seen by society completely in terms of being passive, who actually becomes a victim of violence, and who by pure design, by pure trick of the script, becomes unpunished within the society, because it's a pure concoction that this blackmailer will die during this police pursuit. It's the deus ex machina kind of a solution. Okay, so she will remain unpunished, of course. She will probably be destroyed by guilt in her later life, because she's very much aware of what she did, but also what she experienced. But the film magically just waves a wand and says, okay, you can go, you will remain unpunished. Like, there won't be this society that is so set on putting you in a very clearly cut and very narrow social role. This society will leave you alone. So now deal with your conscience, deal with the sense of guilt that you have. I think it's a deeply ironic ending. It's not a happy ending. It's only a happy ending in terms of she won't go to prison, but she is consumed by guilt and by trauma of what she experienced. And you ask about what will happen. Probably the marriage with the policeman will be terrible. I mean, it probably will be destroyed very, very quickly. But I think that Hitchcock, even in spite of himself, really touches on some key themes of gender, sexuality, society in this movie. But it's quite notable because, let's remember this once we will in the future discuss film Marnie, because there I think he comes to very different conclusions, which from today's standpoint are even more problematic than this. So we will see what happens in Marnie.
Yes, and that's beautifully put. And I will also add that let's remember that we have 1920s, and as many critics pointed out, this movie is very, very deeply, embedded in this culture. And it's a culture which, on the one hand, as you mentioned, wants to, take the agency from women, but on the other hand, it gives them a lot of opportunities, to experience big city life and experience the fun they can have with men in nightclubs, etc., etc. So Blackmail is also, I think, the expression of this 1920s idea that on the one hand they need to be pure, and as many people mentioned, Alice White, this White kind of points to the purity, and it's a change from the original, from the Charles Bennett play. But on the other hand, as the artist is singing, there is some expectation that women will be able to have fun, to be flirtatious, to experience, the pleasures of Sunday or Saturday evenings. So yes, this is something very, very interesting, and in this respect, I would say this movie has not dated in a way. It's still, there is some contemporary tension in it.
Oh, absolutely. I think it will be interesting. Maybe the BFI will fund a remake of this film in 2029 and give some money to a female filmmaker who would make the same story. It would be interesting to change the perspective on this. But I think so, and I think that Hitchcock's later films will provide us plenty of characters of urbane women who are chic and also agents and also sexually quite liberated. I'm thinking like Eve Marie Saint in North by Northwest, but not only. But here you can definitely say you can see that he's exploring those tensions also thanks to the wonderful performance by Annie Ondra. And yes, I think that is a film that sort of it can be always discussed again. Like it's not one like the one interpretation will exhaust its meanings. There are so many tensions that are built into it, including the major technical tension of it being suspended between silent and sound cinema, that it will keep giving. Like this film always on a new approach will provoke interesting readings.
Yes, and that's a great way to sum up Hitchcock's silent career, to which I'm sure we'll refer from time to time. And thank you for listening to us. Thank you for following us on Facebook, on Spotify, and on other platforms. We're working on, enhancing the availability of our podcast, and we can promise you that it will be just more and more interesting in future. And also, please message us, tell us what you think about this podcast, and comment on Facebook. And I think it will be a great joy for us to hear what you think.
So just remember, the fan page on Facebook is Foreign Correspondence Deeper into Hitchcock, and our email is hitchcock.podcast@gmail.com. We would love to hear your comments. Please, if you like the podcast, if you are passionate about Hitchcock, please share the link to the podcast. We are trying to reach new listeners with each episode. And it's incredible, but we just finished the first major chapter of our journey, which is Hitchcock's silent films. Next time, we will talk about Juno and the Peacock and Elstree Calling, two early sound films, one of which was only co-directed by Hitchcock. But all of this and more in following episodes of Foreign Correspondence
Deeper into Hitchcock.